In your opinion, the reports of these UFOs in the Soviet Union, in the oceans, witnessed by their cosmonauts, are they stronger cases than what we hear in other regions of this planet?
Yes. Yes, and we can go into some generalities. First of all, the cases have been observed by trained and experienced observers, such as naval officers or counterintelligence people. They were no-nonsense people. They had an aim in front of them, a goal to study the phenomena, such phenomena as unusual aerial formations or objects that pop out from the bottom of the ocean. How would such objects affect their armed forces, and do they present any danger to the Soviet state? There was not even any doubt that UFOs exist or USOs, unidentified submersible objects. So all this was aside. There was there was no cynical discussion whether UFOs exist or not. Yes, they did. What danger do they present to the Soviet Union? Plus, the Soviet Union being a huge country, most of its areas are very hard to reach, presented in itself a gigantic panorama of UFO study. I will say UFO, but I also include USOs. And cases were fabulous. And the Soviet Union from Stalin on definitely wanted to know, what is it we are facing?
Tonight we're going to talk about some incredible cases, the Russian signs in the sky, the Tunguska situation that occurred in the early 1900s, submersibles, a situation, of course, in the Kola Peninsula, that sighting episode, Kaliningrad, also in Russia. We're going to talk about that as well. It seems to me, Paul, that the witnesses to Soviet sightings, the professionals, the pilots, seem to be a little more forthcoming than Americans of the same kind of credential.
Absolutely. And more than that, even though the Soviet Union was a totalitarian state, their scientists, some of their military high brass, let's say top generals, and astronomers wanted to study UFOs. There was even a movement back in 1967 to get a so-called openness about UFOs. And the high point was when Soviet scientists and their military friends were able to actually present a program on Soviet television and appeal to the population, please help us understand this phenomenon. And it lasted for a short time, but it did. Nothing like that ever took place in the United States. I mean, this is fascinating with all the secrecy and cover-ups. You had more forthright information in the Soviet Union from interesting, and responsible people than you had in the United States.
Are you convinced, with all these sightings in the Soviet Union, that something very real is occurring here?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and it's more than just on the scale of our planet. Definitely in the near space. And what's more, I am convinced that there is an exchange of information between the United States and the Soviet Union. And the best example, I will never stop saying it, was the so-called Phobos space missions.
Let's talk about that before we get into some of these other cases, since you just brought it up. That was an episode where the Soviets sent a probe to Mars, right?
It was a joint Western Soviet mission to the planet Mars, but also to study its moonlets, Phobos and Deimos, especially Phobos. And the mission failed because one of the space probes disappeared on its way to the planet, and the other one, which is more important, was destroyed or kicked out from the area by something in 1989. It was spinned out from the orbit, and that something was a giant cylindrical object that the space probe was able to take a photograph of, and maybe some other objects, according to a Soviet scientist.
Apparently, it was coming toward the satellite, toward the spaceship, and did take a picture or two, right?
It took a picture or two. Yes, absolutely. And again, the last picture that it took was of that gigantic object. But also, according to a Soviet scientist, and Philip and I have gone through Soviet media reports that we were able to get. Very interesting stuff.
Philip Mental.
Yes.
Yeah.
There were my co-author. There were some small bodies that were swarming around the space probe before it disappeared. And I will, again, repeat, this was a joint Western-Soviet space mission, maybe more Western than Soviet.
I remember, Paul, seeing a picture of what looked like the cylindrical object approaching the craft. But I don't remember seeing much more than that. Were there better pictures that we haven't seen out there somewhere?
I'm sure there are. That picture, I remember Marina Popovich, a famous Soviet personality. She was a test pilot and married to Pavel Popovich, a Soviet cosmonaut. We'll speak about them later. She gave me that picture back in 1991, and she said there are more pictures, and she also said that Globkosmos, Soviet Space Agency, knew from the very beginning, knew that the space probes were destroyed by alien force.
Amazing.
Constantly you encounter unusual objects over your nuclear power stations, over military outposts. Yep. You can't hide it.
You can't. Missile ranges everywhere.
Everywhere. And you cannot hide it. And in the state, the government wants to know, is this a threat? And obviously they had a few cases where they tried to shoot down UFOs, let's say, or do things that the UFOs would not like. They got burned. So they wanted to find out, is this going to stop where we stop firing at them? And the answer was obviously yes. Or are they so-called UFOs, USOs, are they going to go against us even if we don't do anything? So they needed to get that answer. And this information leaked out. And, we were lucky that during the perestroika period, when everything was in let's say, in chaotic...
Yes, just collapsing.
Collapsing all around you, a lot of information was released, and you had top Russian military officers and generals coming out and speaking on television and in the media about UFOs, about gigantic discs over Moscow, 200 kilometers, in diameter. They came out, and we have names and dates in the book, who, when, and what they said.
Did they think they were ours, the United States?
No. In some, of course, they always...
Maybe in the beginning.
Sometimes in the beginning, but also they knew the capability of the American technology or the Chinese, and they knew that, if it's a gigantic, submarine-like object going at incredible speeds, at the bottom of the ocean, they knew it wasn't anything the Americans would have.